The badge had been on my chest for 43 days when I put handcuffs on the most powerful law enforcement officer in the state. His name was Richard Calloway. Special agent in charge, 22 years with the FBI, 4 commendations on his wall, and a photograph with the governor shaking his hand behind plexiglass in a mahogany frame. By the time I clicked the second cuff into place, there were 17 witnesses, 2 cameras rolling, and a silence so complete it felt like the whole building had stopped breathing. People would ask me later if I was scared. I wasn't. By then, I was something much colder than scared. But none of that makes sense without going back. Back to the morning, I showed up to my first real shift at the Hargrove County Sheriff's Office, still pressing creases into my uniform because I didn't know yet that nobody did that. My name is Daniel Reeves, 26 years old, 5 months out of the academy, 3 years prior as a security guard at a logistics warehouse. Watching trucks pull in and out at 2 in the morning and dreaming about a different life. When the acceptance letter from the sheriff's office arrived, my mom cried at the kitchen table. My dad shook my hand for the first time in years, the kind of handshake that is not about a greeting, but about something finally being settled between 2 people who never quite knew how to say it out loud. My girlfriend Maya bought a cake with a tiny badge made of frosting on top, and we ate it on the fire escape of our apartment because neither of us could sit still long enough to stay inside. I remember the taste, vanilla, too much buttercream, and thinking that nothing bad could touch us right then. That thought would come back to me later, at the worst possible moment, with all its irony intact. The Hargrove County Sheriff's Office occupied 2 floors of a squat county building that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and old filing paper. 42 deputies, a handful of detectives, and a sheriff named Carl Briggs, who had held the post for 11 years and ran the department with the particular calm that comes from having seen every kind of human failure twice. My training officer was Deputy Carla Soto. Stocky, direct, 38, with close-cropped hair and an economy of expression that made you pay attention to every word that she chose to spend. She handed me a coffee on day 1 and said, without looking up from her paperwork, "Don't spill it, don't ask stupid questions, and don't touch anything until I tell you." I liked her immediately. The first weeks were ordinary in the way that only genuinely good things are. I learned patrol routes, learned which gas stations had the best breakfast sandwiches before 6 a.m., learned that overnight radio chatter was mostly noise and that real calls came in quiet, almost apologetic, like they were embarrassed to interrupt. I wrote reports until my hand cramped. I watched Carla talk down a man in a double-wide trailer on Route 9, a man with broken knuckles and a voice like gravel and a kitchen knife he kept turning over and over in his hand. And she did it with such precise, unhurried patience that afterward I sat in the cruiser for a full silent minute, just trying to understand what I'd witnessed. I asked her how she did it. She looked straight out the windshield. "You talk to people like they're people," she said, with her usual flatness. "Even when they're not acting like it. That's the whole job, Reeves. Don't make it complicated." It was on day 31 that I first heard the name Calloway. We were responding to a welfare check outside of town. A farmhouse off Millbrook Road, flagged by a neighbor who'd noticed the lights cycling on and off at strange hours and hadn't seen the usual trucks come and go. Carla pulled up the address on her laptop and went quiet. Not a long silence. Not the kind you'd notice unless you'd been watching her for a month the way I had. Just a small compression of her expression, a fraction of a second where her jaw tightened and then released. And then she was already pulling out of the lot. "This place has been flagged before," she said, almost to herself, as we turned onto the county road. "Flagged how?" I asked. The kind of flagged where someone upstairs clears it before it goes anywhere. I waited for more. She didn't offer any. I filed it away the way you file away things that don't quite make sense yet, but carry a weight that tells you they might matter later. Like a word in a foreign language you don't know, but can feel the meaning of from the tone alone. The farmhouse was still when we arrived. Curtains drawn, no answer at the door, a smell of wood smoke that was several days old. Around the back, there was a car, a clean, dark blue government sedan with federal plates, parked at the far edge of the gravel lot like it was trying not to be noticed. I wrote down the plate number in my notebook, the way Carla had drilled into me. Anything out of place, you record it. She saw me do it. She didn't say anything, but she gave me a look I didn't know how to read yet. We cleared the property and marked it quiet. That evening I told Maya about it over pasta, the empty house, the 2-day-old wood smoke, the government car that had no business sitting in a gravel lane off Millbrook Road. She listened with her chin in her hand, the way she always did when she was actually thinking rather than just hearing. "Why would a federal car be parked at an empty house?" she said. "I don't know." "Probably nothing," I said. She looked at me with that expression she had, the paralegal look, the one that said she'd already identified the problem and was waiting for me to catch up. "Find out," she said simply, and went back to eating. I might have let it go. I might have folded it into the normal accumulation of strange things that gather around law enforcement and eventually stop meaning anything. Except 3 days later, someone pulled my report on the farmhouse. I only discovered it because of a small, bureaucratic accident. The department's digital filing system had been recently upgraded, and buried in the new version was a notification feature almost nobody had found yet. It logged when your reports were accessed by users outside your unit. I'd been studying the system manuals the way nervous rookies do, trying to know the infrastructure before I needed it in a hurry. And when I saw the access flag one morning, I stared at it for a long time before I let myself process what it said. The report had been accessed by a federal badge number. I ran it through the Interagency Cross-Reference Directory. The name came back in plain black text on a white screen. Richard A. Callaway, Special Agent in Charge, Hargrove Field Office. The head of the FBI in our entire state had pulled my 48-line welfare check report about an empty farmhouse. The coffee beside my keyboard was still hot. I remember watching the steam rise from it and thinking, very deliberately, that there was probably an explanation. Broad federal oversight, jurisdictional overlap. I was 40 days on the job. I didn't know what I didn't know. I told myself that for about 4 minutes. Then I ran the plate. The sedan was registered to the Hargrove Field Office motor pool. Assigned vehicle, nothing unusual there. But when I cross-referenced the checkout log, accessible under a mutual aid interagency agreement buried 4 levels deep, the entry stopped me. The car had been checked out on a Tuesday. We'd responded on a Thursday. It had not been returned between those 2 dates. It had been sitting at that empty house for 2 days before we ever got the call. My hands weren't shaking. They just went very still. The way everything goes still when one part of your brain is running faster than the rest of it can follow. The office sounds around me, phones, the distant copy machine, a chair scraping, felt like they were coming from another floor. I photographed my screen with my personal phone. Then I closed the tab, picked up my coffee, and sat there for a while, just breathing. That night, I told Maya something was wrong. I didn't know yet what it was, but I could feel the shape of it. The way you feel the shape of a thing in the dark before you're ready to turn on the light. I spent the next 2 days moving carefully and telling nobody. Whatever this was, It sat above the pay grade of everyone I trusted, and I had no way of knowing yet whose hands it had already passed through. So I worked quietly, testing each step before I shifted my full weight onto it. I pulled every cross-agency report tied to that farmhouse address going back 3 years. 6 reports in total. Everyone closed out inside 48 hours, marked resolved, no action required, with 3 different supervisors' signatures. But on the back-end access log, the one nobody had checked because the system upgrade was so recent, every report had been viewed by the same federal badge number within an hour of being filed. Calloway. Every time. The farmhouse wasn't an oversight. It was a system. I called Maya from the parking garage that evening with the engine off and the concrete cold around me. "I need you to tell me if I'm reading this wrong," I said, and walked her through all of it. She was quiet through most of it. When I finished, there was a pause long enough for me to hear her set something down on the counter. "That's not a coincidence," she said. "If he's been accessing those files himself, every time, within the hour, he's not just aware of that property. He's managing it." A breath. "You need a lawyer, not someone from the department. Someone completely outside." I found the name through a contact of Maya's, a federal civil rights attorney named Patricia Okafor. 4th floor of a building downtown, old carpet, locked filing cabinets, and eyes that suggested she had heard stranger things than whatever you were about to tell her. She listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, she set her pen down, aligned it parallel to the edge of the pad, and looked at me steadily. "You're describing a federal official using his access to monitor and suppress local law enforcement reports on a specific property. Repeatedly. 3 years. "Yes," I said. "Can you get the official system exports? Not screenshots, the actual logs, with your IT department's authentication?" "I'd need a reason that doesn't tip anyone off." She nodded slowly. "There's a whistleblower framework that protects you if you file before anyone knows you filed." She paused. "Is there anything else on that property you're not telling me?" "No," I said. "I don't know what's there. I only know he doesn't want anyone to find out." "That," she said quietly, "is sometimes the most useful kind of evidence." I spent the night before it happened at the kitchen table with cold tea and 4 pages of notes, going over everything by lamplight while Maya slept. The apartment was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum. I kept thinking about Carla's face on that county road, that small, private compression of her jaw. And suddenly, it meant something different. She'd known the address. She'd watched me write down the plate without a word. Had she been protecting me? Or watching to see what I'd do? I filed that question away and left it there. The call came on day 43. A routine traffic stop request on the county line, the kind dispatched to whoever was nearest. I was nearest. Dark blue sedan. Federal plate. I ran it before I got out of the cruiser. Richard A. Calloway came back as the registered driver. My pulse didn't spike. It leveled out, the way it does when something you've been bracing for finally arrives, and fear stops being a useful input. I had the photographs. I had Patricia on speed dial. And I had, as she'd confirmed 2 days prior, a complete export of the access logs pulled under the cover of a routine system audit she'd helped orchestrate from the outside. I got out of the cruiser. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of face that had spent decades projecting institutional authority and grown very comfortable with what that looked like. Credentials already out before I reached the window. A practice gesture, the kind that usually ended conversations before they started. "Agent Calloway, FBI," he said, in a tone that sat exactly between politeness and threat. "What's the issue, Deputy?" "Sir, I need to ask you to step out of the vehicle," I said. The silence that followed carried the full weight of the gap between a 26-year-old with 43 days on the job and a 22-year federal veteran. He let me feel it for a moment before the corner of his mouth moved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't think you understand how this works, son." "I understand how it works," I said. "Please step out of the vehicle." He stood on the shoulder and looked at me with an expression that had passed through irritation and arrived somewhere quieter and more dangerous. "I want your supervisor's name and badge number. Right now." "You'll have all of that," I said. "Right now, I'm placing you under investigative detention in connection with 3 years of unauthorized access to law enforcement reports and the suppression of active investigations involving county property at 14 Millbrook Road. I have the logs, the timestamps, the export signed with your own credentials." He didn't move. He didn't speak for 4 full seconds. And in those seconds, I watched something cross his face. Disbelief, then calculation, then something I hadn't expected. A brief flash of what looked almost like recognition. Like he'd been waiting for this too, and was checking to see how far off his estimate had been. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. Not as a threat, as a fact. "Maybe," I said. "Hands where I can see them, please." 2 county cruisers were on scene within 4 minutes. I'd called them in before I ever walked to his window. Sheriff Briggs arrived 8 minutes later in his personal vehicle without his jacket, which told me he'd left home fast. Patricia was on the phone with Federal District Oversight before the cuffs were closed. And Carla pulled up last, stood at the edge of the shoulder with her arms crossed, and watched with an expression I finally understood. Not surprise. The look of someone who had been quietly waiting for the right person to walk through a door she'd left open. She met my eyes across the road. One nod. Nothing more. It was enough. Calloway was suspended within 48 hours, stripped of credentials within 2 weeks, indicted on 4 federal counts 8 months after that. The investigation reached into offices I hadn't known existed when it started. He'd been using Millbrook Road as a coordination point for redirecting sealed federal case files, quietly breaking evidence chains, making certain prosecutions disappear before they reached courtrooms. He had access. He had credibility. He had a perfect system until a department upgraded its software and a rookie who didn't know enough to be discouraged wrote down a plate number out of reflex. The photograph of him with the governor came off the wall one quiet afternoon. Nobody announced it. It was just gone. I heard later that Carla had been building her own file on Millbrook Road for over a year, waiting for evidence solid enough to survive whoever Calloway had in his corner. She never told me directly. But about a month after the arrest, she set a coffee on my desk and said, without any lead-up, "You wrote down the plate." Then she walked back to her own desk like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything back. Some things don't need a response. 6 months later, I sat at the kitchen table in our new apartment, slightly bigger, with morning light in the kitchen, and drank my coffee while Maya read beside me. On the fridge, held up by a small magnet, was the frosting badge from the cake she'd made me when the letter came. She'd dried it out and kept it. I'd never noticed until we moved. I looked at it for a long time. 43 days. I'd written down a plate number because someone told me to record anything that felt out of place. That was the whole thing. That was all it ever was. Maya looked up and caught me staring at the fridge. "What?" she said. I shook my head. "Just thinking." She glanced at the frosting badge, then back at me. That expression she had, the one that meant she already knew and was letting me arrive at it on my own. "Still too much buttercream," she said. I laughed. For the first time in a long time, it came all the way out.